All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Emily Alvarez, and I'm the BayREN lead for the Green Labeling Program, which includes the Home Energy Score portion of the program. Thanks for joining us today. We had one previous webinar on the Electrification Checklist, but we wanted to give you all a second opportunity to become familiar with it. We also, from feedback that we received since it launched, made a few tweaks, mostly to the wording to hopefully make it easier for all of you. And so Angel is going to take us through the checklist today. Hopefully we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. But first I wanted to introduce Ammon Reagan from the city of Berkeley.
Hello everyone, this is Ammon. I help manage the BayREN program for the city of Berkeley. And so for some context, Berkeley's really heavily focused on electrification and decreasing emissions from our building sector. And we're in the process of a big BaySO update. And then part of that is to include the electrification on all of our assessments. And so this checklist would be the method of how we're including electrification recommendations and information through our assessments for single family homes and home energy score. And so we'll start requiring it in November. And so if you have any questions, you can reach out to me too. And then I'll pass it back to the team.
All right, thank you. My name is Angel Garza. I'm with Frontier Energy. Most of you know me as the day-to-day coordinator of the Home Energy Score program. And let's get started. So just a couple of Zoom how-tos. As Emily said, video is not needed. Please use the chat feature for any questions. I'm not sure if we have panelists since I don't believe this is a webinar, but the chat feature is always a great function to use if it is not available. Here they are in your Zoom. They're at the bottom of your screen. There's the chat. Let's just use the chat. So for today, we're going to be going over quickly just the Berkeley ordinance, the electrification checklist itself, and then the equipment that's included in that checklist. So electrification is a term for replacing fossil fuels like natural gas and propane. You'll also hear terms like fuel substitution, fuel switching, gas to electric, also describes the electrification. BayREN is aiming to achieve statewide goals of decarbonization and electrification of buildings. And so we developed the electrification checklist to help collect additional data points about the home since we're currently in the home. So these are all done concurrently with the home energy score assessment. So just a quick recap, and for those who are visual learners, the electrification checklist will be mandatory starting November 1st. So that means when you are submitting a home energy score to the DOE tool or through the database, they will not be approved without the electrification checklist. There are additional photo requirements that we'll go through in the presentation that you'll need to collect. And we actually currently offer a $100 incentive for the electrification checklist, and that will be eligible for the first 6 months. The exact cutoff date will be determined at a later date. And Ammon can give you more information about that. So the goal of the electrification checklist is to determine if a home is suitable for the electric-based recommendations. The home energy score wants to give assessors the tools to promote electric recommendations knowledgeably and with confidence by knowing when to recommend electric improvements, recognizing potential barriers to electrification, and we'll go through these in the presentations, as well as be a resource to homeowners when they have questions about why you're recommending the things that you recommend. So on the right is just an example of the assessor report that's given to homeowners. And we see here at the bottom where today's conditions, if it's an 80% gas furnace, for example, typically maybe someone would recommend a 95% furnace to replace it. But if we recognize the home as a good candidate for electrification, we would maybe want to recommend an electric heat pump instead. So the first information we want to collect is about the hot water heaters. Information that we collect on the checklist includes the fuel type, the water heater's location, the area of that water heater's location, and the height of the location. We also want to recognize if that location has the ability to provide air circulation. So first, we want to just correctly identify water heater types. So the way to see a gas water heater is 1, there's a presence of a flue. 2, you'll see a gas line. 3, there's a gas control valve that includes the pilot light, able to control the temperature of the water heater. And the only thing that's different in the case of a tankless water heater is you won't be able to see that pilot light likely. And then the one thing that might be a little concerning is that it will likely be plugged into an electric source. It does use a little bit of electricity, even for a gas tankless water heater. But here we can still identify that this water heater has a flue pipe and a gas line. So being able to identify an electric water heater, it'll be hardwired with a thick supply cord. It's usually metal or gray, like these photos in between the 2 water heaters, and it's likely at the top of the water heater going onto the wall. There's going to be no control valve or pilot light. There is no gas flue, and there is no gas line. And then similar, we see with an electric water heater, it's still plugged into a source, but we don't see a flue, and then there's no gas line. So the location and air circulation can be visually identified. And what we're looking for is making sure that that water heater is located in something like a conditioned closet versus an outside closet, in the garage, the attic, things like that. If the water heater is in a confined space, that's when we want to get the dimensions of that confined area. So this is in the case if there's like a shed or a room built around the water heater, it might just be big enough for that current water heater's dimensions. But we see with heat pumps are a little bit larger and they're a little taller. So we want to get this information so we know if we're recommending a larger electric water heater, a heat pump water heater, we want to make sure that it's actually going to fit in the home and just be confident that we're giving them recommendations that are best suited for their current situation with minimal contracting work, unless you're a contractor, and that's going to be part of your scope. Another thing we want to be making sure is present is air circulation. We want to check if there's a vent to the outside, if there's vents to the conditioned space, if there's current mechanical ventilation, or if the area is over 1,000 cubic feet, which we can get from the dimensions, or if there's like a louvered door. So in the photos to the right, we can see that this home would be a good candidate for a heat pump water heater because they already have large enough to include, it can likely fit. So a little bit more about heat pump water heaters. We want to know the facts when recommending it to a homeowner. They are more efficient than electric resistance or gas water heaters. They can only be installed indoors, and that means like a garage is best, just nowhere outside. Not technically indoors like the house, because the heat pump makes the area around it cooler. We want to still make sure that the homeowner is comfortable with the heat pump water heater in the house. Gallon for gallon, a heat pump is going to be larger than a gas water heater, and there's going to need to be an electrical supply within 3 feet of the water heater. That's more related to code, but it is a good thing to recognize that they will need to put in an electric line in order to switch from a gas to a water heater, a gas to an electric water heater. And then the electrical panel needs to have available space for that appliance. So a couple of questions we want to keep in the back of our mind when we're recommending things to homeowners is, can these requirements be met without extensive home upgrades, unless you're already planning to do upgrades? So what makes a good candidate for a heat pump recommendation? The water heater is inside the garage, a basement, or other space separate for the living areas, and the space is or can provide air circulation. What makes it a great candidate is when there's less extensive electrical upgrades or home upgrades that need to occur, meaning that there's an outlet already within 3 feet. The house has an existing tank storage water heater. The water heater is not located in a closet or confined area, and there's extra space in that electrical panel. So we're moving on to space heating and cooling. Questions are pretty simple. As you know, during the home energy score, we already gather the fuel type, we already know the efficiencies and whatnot. So really what we're wanting to know now is what if the cooling load and if there's a presence of air conditioning and how the equipment is paired. So first, window air conditioners. As you know, the score only allows 2 HVAC systems. So I'm sure you've run into situations where the window AC is generalized with larger equipment. So usually we don't actually see that AC if there's 2 other units in the house. Here in the electrification checklist, we want to be able to identify with a yes or no if there is a window AC present, whether it's operational or non-operational. For HVAC characteristics, we want to know if the HVAC system is combined heated and cooling, meaning that the hot and cold air come from the same duct or unit, so a central gas air and then a central AC system. Or if they're a separate heating and cooling system, either the hot or cold air comes from the ducts or neither of the heating or cooling system is ducted. So electrifying with a heat pump for your HVAC, BayREN does offer rebates for this, but the home must have an existing cooling load. And we probably won't run into this so much in Berkeley since typically and in the past, there hasn't been a need for a cooling load, but we're seeing more and more people wanting to install air conditioning. So a couple of things we want to know when recommending is that the heat pump provides both heating and cooling. A heat pump can be ducted or ductless for their situation. And then the electrical panel needs space for that indoor and outdoor appliance. It's really important that there's both a heating and a cooling load, and it could be in the form of a wall furnace and an AC. That's when we would likely recommend the ductless equipment. And there's very specific rules that need to be met to meet the BayREN requirement for those rebates. So always ask yourself, is there an existing cooling system present? So a good candidate for a heat pump HVAC is that the house has either a wall furnace and a window AC, and the house has a gas furnace and a central AC. A great candidate, a room for a condenser unit, typically away from the neighbors since it does generate some noise. And then the house has undergone envelope improvements like air sealing or insulation. And then there's always extra space in that electrical panel. So next we're going into stoves and cooktops. We're going to be collecting the fuel type. If it's an electric stove, we also want to know the burner style. And then we also want to know if the stove is older than 5 years. So just being able to identify the type, gas stove will always have an open flame. Electric stoves differ slightly. They have an electric resistance type and an induction type. The coil spiral type of stove pictured on the left is an electric resistance. And then the flat top stove can either be electric resistance or induction. If it's electric resistance, you would turn it on and the surface would heat up. But an induction type, it will turn on and the surface remains cold. So we want to be able to make sure that we're categorizing that correctly. Stove types definitely differ in energy efficiency. So a gas stove only gets to about 40% efficiency, while an electric coil has an energy factor or efficiency of up to 84%. And a flat top instead actually goes up only to 75%. But induction is the clear winner. It has an efficiency up to 90%. And BayREN now offers a $300 rebate for induction cooktops. And we also have it now as a recommendation as part of the home energy score assessment. So one thing to know is that BayREN rebates are only qualified for homeowners that have an existing gas stove. But when we want to present the facts to the homeowner about them, we really want to hit them with the efficiencies. For an 80 to 95% efficient induction stove, meanwhile gas is anywhere between 25 and 40%. Inductions produce a fraction less of pollutants and heat during cooking. And then if they're getting ready to replace their stove, we really want to know how old it is, because I'm sure a homeowner will not want to replace a stove that they just bought 3 years ago. So we just want to be sure that before recommending it, it's actually time to replace that stove. So again, a good candidate for this is the house currently has a gas stove and it's older than 5 years. What makes it a great candidate is there's extra space in the electrical panel again to be able to meet the electrical demands. Okay, so we're going into clothes dryers now. Here we just want to know the fuel type and if it's older than 5 years. Again, BayREN offers a $300 rebate, and those recommendations are available now on homeenergyscorereport.com. So there's 2 ways to determine if the dryer is gas. There's an information sticker, and the gas type will be listed as gas, or you'll see BTUH listed somewhere. Behind the dryer, there's a thinner 3-prong electrical cord, just a normal cord, and it's compatible with a normal wall outlet, and you'll see a gas line. And then if you see a large vent hose, it doesn't determine the fuel type. That's just for venting. Highlighted here, you can also see where on the sticker it says natural gas. There's 2 ways to determine if a dryer is electric. There's the informational sticker, which will mention the voltage, or behind the dryer, there could be a thicker 3- or 4-prong electrical cord, and then that's only for a 240 outlet. So it's gonna look like a larger one. It'll look something like this. And so either way, if it's more accessible to look behind the dryer, just you will want to snap a photo of the back, or if you can find the informational sticker faster, either one is fine. And again, if there's a large vent hose that doesn't determine fuel type, that's just for the venting. A couple of places you can find the information sticker if you can't get to the back of the dryer. Common locations include the back of the unit, near the front cabinet door, on the side of the cabinet door jamb, or on the inside of the door. BayREN offers a rebate on heat pump dryers when replacing an existing gas dryer only. A couple of facts that you want to be able to let the homeowner know is it's 250% more efficient, while the standard gas dryer is about 30%. They would be eligible for a new dryer if it's gas. And then we will require more electricity, therefore more space in the electrical panel. And a heat pump dryer doesn't require any outside venting. So again, we want to be able to make sure that we're recommending replacing equipment that's older than 5 years and letting them know that there's a rebate. And then of course, the great candidate is that there's extra space in that electrical panel. So we've been mentioning extra space in the electrical panel, but part of the electrification checklist is being able to identify if there's room in the panel, if the panel has enough amperage to be able to sustain these upgrades and whatnot. So things that we're going to be collecting is the type of panel, amperage, what appliances are served by that panel, and if you see any blank spaces or unused breakers. And then similarly, we do the same for an electrical subpanel. If there is one, we ask those same 3 questions. So first, just being able to identify these panel types. A fuse box was typically found in houses built before 1970 that haven't received any upgrades since then. Definitely, if you do see a fuse box, the panel will need to be upgraded before any electrification recommendations should be recommended. The main breaker panel is a common service panel, and it ranges from 60 to 200 amps. If you run into a panel that's 100 amps or less, we will likely need a panel upgrade before electrification can occur. And then subpanels, it's typically going to be a smaller service panel inside the house. It distributes power to a specific area of the home or other buildings and large properties. So how do you determine the amperage? There's 2 ways. Most homes will likely be 100 or 200 amp panel. And the 2 methods to finding that is if you see the white circle at the top of this image, it says 200 on the tip of the breaker. And then 2, there's a diagram on the inside cover of the panel box that will state the amperage. Oh, and I don't have that photo, I'm sorry. So on the diagram, there's typically a diagram, sometimes they're a little faded, but you should be able to find somewhere that says blank amperage. So the main breaker locations are different depending on the panel. It's usually in 3 different places, either the top, the bottom, or the central. You can see that in the image that the main breaker is on its own line, and that's typically the way to be able to see that. And then subpanels will sometimes have the same main circuit breaker, but not always. So here we have an example of a subpanel amperage usage. You see here that there is no main breaker here that's on its own line. So the best way to determine the amperage of this subpanel would be to add up the total numbers on each breaker. And here, where the tan is connected with 2 breakers, that's a double breaker, and we would actually add up those values separately. So this 30-30 is going to be 60, and this 40-40 is going to be 80. So all of the numbers added on the breakers actually equals to a 270 amp subpanel. You can also see here at the bottom that there are some empty spaces. So there's definitely room for more that's happening. Another thing about these double breakers is that would likely be something that uses more power, like a heat pump water heater or a heat pump HVAC, while the smaller ones are things like lights, what was that thing called? The garbage disposal, things like that. So again, this is an example that the house would be a good candidate for electrification. So here on this image, we can actually see what some of these breakers are coordinating with. So here we can see that this double breaker on the left is actually for the dryer, and this double breaker on the right is for the gas, right? No, excuse me, the stove, which is in fact electric. So larger appliances will have double breakers. And then again, from the picture, we see that there's 6 breaker spaces available. So the house may have capacity for electric appliance upgrades. So there are some conditions where even though it is a, it's not a fuse box panel, but it will need some additional upgrades just because there's been recalls, or it's likely to provide a fire safety risk. Even though it has adequate amperage, it still needs to be upgraded. And there are 2 specific types that you might run in still today, where in these cases, we just want to let the homeowner know that an electrical upgrade might be required before they can continue an additional work. So the first one is a Zinsco. It was really popular in the 1970s, but recalled due to sparking and fire safety issues. And you can tell when it's a Zinsco by the color of the switches. And you can also see on the one breaker, it has like 2 mini breakers. And then the next one is the Federal Pacific Electric, FPE. This is common in houses built in the 50s and 80s, 50s through 80s. And here you can see that it has like a red tip on the breaker. So again, these are just things that you want to be able to look out for. If you notice hazards like rust or corrosion, melting plastic, you want to stop right away and let the homeowner know that an electrician is needed to properly assess the home. Okay, so for panel upgrades for electrification, we want to know the facts about the panel upgrades. Older panels may pose safety hazards, not always, but just want to keep an eye out. And then the next home improvement may need more electricity. Things like rooftop solar, EV chargers, cooling systems, electrifying equipment and appliances, or just doing work to their house like a room addition will likely need an upgrade to their electrical panel if they have something like a 100 amp panel. And this is really just a typical house. Each house that you actually go into is going to be a little bit different. It might not be as simple or straightforward, and some of this information might not be easily derived. So we want to just be able to do as best as we can. In the electrification, there is an area saying if there isn't something that you weren't able to provide, just simply state the reason why. Sometimes it's hard to determine if the amperage of a panel is 100 or 200 or otherwise, because the labels can be very worn down or non-accessible. So other considerations for whole house electrification, typically a 200 amp panel or greater is better. If there's free breaker spaces, that means that there's ample room to upgrade the house even further. Or if a house has solar panels, it will likely reduce or eliminate that bill when they go all electric. So the electrification checklist has been on the homeenergyscorereport.com since July. We offer a $100 electrification checklist incentive that's available for each home. Again, because this is now occurring in Berkeley, this will only be eligible for the next 6 months with the exact date to be determined. The electrification checklist is inputted on homeenergyscorereport.com. And you would actually go onto the Edit Label tab, check the box for electrification, and then complete the checklist. The checklist looks exactly like the paper checklist. So unfortunately at this time, it is a little bit more manual from the paper checklist that you take into the field and then what you actually have to transfer to the computer. There are additional photos related to the checklist that are required. We would want a photo of the stove, clothes dryer. With the home energy score, you already get photos of the HVAC system as well as the water heater. So we will also want photos of the electrical panel. And then there are additional recommendations for the stove and clothes dryer that are now available. It's no longer coming soon. So I believe there's been some questions throughout the presentation. Sorry that we had you wait until the end, but I'm gonna see if there's any more that need to be answered.
Yeah, I think I've answered them all, Angel, but we can certainly open it up for people to ask either via chat or to unmute themselves. I guess one thing I want to point out first is that the $100 electrification checklist rebate or bonus rebate, not really a rebate, I guess, we're just sort of giving you that money, is direct to the assessor. It is not one that's available to either the homeowner or the assessor, and it is eligible right now in the city of Berkeley. As the requirement, as you all get used to the requirement, the city of Berkeley is considering phasing that out. It is likely to end after maybe about 6 months, but for now, the electrification $100 is available in the city of Berkeley and will be available through at least the end of 2021 in all other BayREN cities where you might be doing work. Ammon, is there anything else you want to clarify about the Berkeley requirement, or are we good?
Just a reminder to everyone that we'll be requiring the checklist on BASO assessments starting November 1st.
And that is one assessment per home, or one rebate per home. So if you do go back and do a score multiple times on the same house, you can only get the $100 for the checklist one time. Do we have, so do we have to fill and upload the paper checklist, or can we fill and submit the one on the portal? Angel, can you take that one?
Yeah. So you will actually upload, you can't upload the paper checklist. You actually have to click electrification checklist, and then it asks you all the same questions from the paper checklist. So you will have to fill and submit it. And not to the portal, the DOE portal is different from the HESreport.com. Just want to clarify that it's submitted on the database.
And when you're doing your first one, if you get tripped up, of course, feel free to reach out to us and we can help walk you through it. For so the $100 electrification checklist incentive is available throughout all of BayREN territory. So every city. I know I realized that I may have reversed it. It was a little confusing in the sense. So it's currently available everywhere. We will be phasing out the availability in just the city of Berkeley in probably about 6 months, although that is TBD. For everywhere else in BayREN territory, we have the intention of running the $100 rebate through at least the end of 2021. Hopefully I cleared that up. If a homeowner has Alameda Power, they are eligible for BayREN rebates since they are a PG&E customer through their natural gas. The only city that is not eligible, I guess I should clarify, for any BayREN rebates, or at least the home energy score rebates, is the city of Palo Alto, because their municipal utility is both gas and electric. But all the other municipal utilities are just electric, so they're at least partial PG&E customers. So, but that was Mickey's second question. When documenting the panel and whether or not it is, or whether or not, for example, the stove is serviced by a panel, a gas range will have a connection. I am assuming that we will not include it for the panel as it is not an electric range. Angel, do you know how to answer that, or can we maybe ask Mickey to clarify?
Mickey, could you clarify? And you can definitely unmute yourself.
Sorry, yeah, sorry. The gas range is, it's going to have some sort of a connection to the panel, but it's not going to be taking a big breaker. It's going to have a 15 amp breaker or a 10 amp breaker, rather than if it was an electric, it might have a 40 amp breaker. So I'm just kind of assuming, since we're looking at upgrading and adding perhaps an induction stove, which would be a higher amperage than I'm just kind of guessing that you don't need to check the box for the panel having an electric connection. That would be confusing.
Yeah, so what we really want to rely on is if that electric panel has empty space. So like how you said, we might go from a single breaker to a double breaker when switching from gas to electric. So that's why in the checklist, we ask if there is electric extra space, is to make sure that if changes like that are needed, it would be easily done without extensive upgrades to the electrical panel.
Yeah, maybe another clarification is that when looking at the electric panel, we're not necessarily looking for you to identify if there's space for each individual appliance, but more of just a general look at, you know, is this a 75 amp panel that's really maxed out, or is it one that has some room or some flexibility? So we don't have to get that specific. If you want to, then that's fine. But it's definitely more of a general assessment of whether or not there's sufficient space. And then I'm assuming Angel's putting that up there because is there a dedicated BayREN advisor for us to speak to? You can always speak to Angel at Frontier, who's talking to you now. And I believe you can also always talk to Ammon, but for some of the technical questions, you may, I assume, be better off contacting Angel.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
So, I believe so, Bruce. So if it's gas, we would not list these appliances as served by the breaker panel. You can always refer to the guide within the panel. It specifies which panel goes, which breaker serves what. So if it's there, you can check the box. If it's not a big deal.
Yeah, I think that goes to my same comment that we're not necessarily saying that you have to list what each breaker is for. It's more just a more general assessment of if the panel seems small and maxed out, or if there is room for some of these extra appliances. Since we know not all of you are electricians, even it took me a while when we were making this checklist to figure out my own electrical panel. Will a central gas furnace and AC have any trouble qualifying for a mini split system? So I guess I'll clarify two different things. One is what you feel comfortable recommending as an assessor. The second is what qualifies for a BayREN rebate. So you know that you can recommend whatever you feel is best for the home, whether or not a rebate is available. Obviously, having rebates available is a great incentive and may influence what you recommend, especially since, you know, any furnace upgrade, whether it's gas or a heat pump, is expensive. So right now, because of state guidance or state requirements, the BayREN rebates are not very flexible. So if you have a central gas furnace with a central AC system, then you must switch to a central or a ducted heat pump system in order to qualify for a rebate. If you have something like a wall furnace with a window air conditioning unit, then the rebates are structured where you would have to switch to a mini split system in order to qualify for a rebate. For some reason, even though an air conditioner unit qualifies as an AC load for that decentralized system, it doesn't qualify at this point if as a cooling load for a central gas furnace. So you know, you'll have to make that assessment for yourself as to whether or not, you know, you'll be comfortable making those recommendations. We're hoping that that is going to change, and the BayREN team is working on getting that changed, but it's sort of our hands are tied a bit by the state at this moment, what they're allowing, partially because these electrification rebates are very new and previously were just not allowed at all. And so the first round of what we're allowed to incentivize is pretty restricted. So that's my complicated answer for whether or not a central gas furnace and an AC would have qualifying trouble qualifying for a mini split system. So that example you gave would not be able to qualify for a BayREN rebate at this time, but it might be the best solution for the homeowner. The good thing is, at least in the city of Berkeley, there are actually a lot of wall heaters. So you might come into more of that situation with a wall furnace and a window AC unit. All right. Are there other questions? You can either chat them or unmute yourself.
There is one thing I want to clarify about the incentive for the checklist. You will need to submit a rebate application. It doesn't matter. You could submit that to the customer for payment or for yourself for payment, but it is required to process the incentive. And I didn't include it in the presentation, but I can definitely forward that to Ammon as well. So if you are wanting to pursue receiving that incentive, you will need to fill out an application and submit that with your home energy score. I know that might not have been a concern to BaySO assessors before, since to date you haven't really had an opportunity to receive the home energy score incentive. So just a heads up.
Since you bring that up, because I know a lot of our BaySO assessors work in other cities, but I know some don't. Is there also any other requirements, like providing a I'm gonna mess up the W-9. I was like that they have to provide as well to get the rebates?
If you intend to claim the incentive, please send me your W-9. If it will always go to the customer, I do not need your W-9.
Yes, Mickey, the Berkeley residences qualify for the $100 electrification rebate. They still do not qualify for the $200, main home energy score rebate. So other questions? If not, since this is being recorded, I probably will read and answer the other questions in the Q&A, because I realized that those would not be captured in the recording that we're going to post, and some of them are really good questions. So you're welcome to hang on for that, or if you have other questions, but otherwise just letting you know that I'll probably just read those Q&As so that they're part of the recording.
Hi, this is Ellie Ron. Just a quick question. I know you're posting the recording on YouTube and will send us the link. The slides would be useful for us to be able to use in presentations and to refresh and have your pictures. So if you can send out the slides, even if those are static without a recording, that would be great.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I guess I'm going to read these other questions. Feel free if you want, if something else has come up, to ask a question in the chat, and we are always available. Oh, does the rebate need the homeowner's signature? Yes, it does. All right. Well, yeah, feel free to either keep adding questions to the chat or to contact us at any time with questions. So we had a question as to why, a gas water heater requires ventilation, but why would an electric water heater need ventilation? Ventilation for gas appliances needs ventilation for makeup air and possible gas release. So the heat pump water heaters, since they're drawing air in order to heat the water, they require air that, that they need air to be able to pull from. So it's recommended about 750 to 1,000 cubic feet of airspace is needed. So that's why we're asking for the location and also the dimensions of where they're located. It is often a really great fit for something like being in a garage or a basement or a larger utility room that might have multiple utilities in it, as many people have. It is not necessarily the best fit for a like tiny closet that may be in the middle of the house that a lot of homes have, although those are also possible. They also do give off cold air, which is another reason why they're really great sometimes in an unventilated space, although apparently they can be in, vent to conditioned space as well without too much problem. So that might be one of those differences between a good fit and a great fit. Then do plug-in electric cooktops, induction cooktops qualify for the BayREN rebate? So cooktops and ranges qualify for the BayREN rebate for induction. So if it is just an induction cooktop, it still has to replace a gas cooktop. So for example, it wouldn't count if, let's say, somebody has a gas range currently and is switching to an induction cooktop and a gas range, sort of, or a gas oven separately. But it would qualify if somebody had a current gas cooktop and is switching out for an induction cooktop, and the oven is, let's say, not being touched. Also, hybrid systems that might have an electric cooktop and a gas oven, or vice versa, sorry. There are some hybrid systems with like a convection oven or electric oven and a gas cooktop. Those don't count either. We can share the link I did in the chat of the rebate measures. I'll skip down to the bottom. If there's not enough room for the heat pump water heater air volume, you can duct the unit and you need to account for more space for ducting. So yes, there's definitely ways that the heat pump water heaters can fit into other configurations. Some just might take a little bit more construction. So this is why we're just trying to hopefully get you guys used to recognizing these conditions and hopefully then becoming more confident in when you make electrification recommendations. Is a hot water heater in an interior closet vented to the exterior conditioned space? I am not an expert on installation of water heaters. That sounds like it would probably be okay. But you know, in this case, then if you recommended a heat pump water heater to a homeowner and then a plumber came in to install it and realized that there's extra work that needs to be done, you know, that might happen. But I mean, as assessors who are making recommendations that may be actually installed by another entity, you know, it's kind of always a risk that happens. You might be recommending something that a homeowner is either ultimately not actually interested in, or when they call an HVAC person out, let's say, to make those changes, something can kind of always go wrong. So again, this is just about using your best judgment so that we're all becoming more well-versed in electrification, since it is definitely different than just requiring gas appliances or recommending gas appliances. Someone recently ran into a main breaker panel that was painted shut. Shall we document this or attempt to slice the paint and open the panel? Generally, I would say that we don't want you to do anything that you're not comfortable with or that could be unsafe. This might be an issue with electrical panels. So if there's anything on the checklist that you can't complete, we just ask that you document it, which I believe Angel mentioned after this question was asked, and explain why it couldn't be considered complete. So this is both so that we're not putting, you know, you in any situations that are potentially dangerous, but also it kind of helps us, maybe not in this painted shut example, but if there's a reason you can't fill something out and it's something that's coming up over and over again, then it also gives us information that maybe it's something that needs to be changed. So that feedback is actually really helpful. If you do run into situations like the panel being painted shut, same as how Angel mentioned in the presentation, if you run into one of these dangerous electrical panels or rust or something else that seems like a hazard or inappropriate, it just might be worth bringing up to the homeowner. Hey, by the way, your electrical panel's painted shut, and you might want to fix that. The Electrification Checklist is a BayREN pilot program, so it is not part of the countywide or countrywide home energy score program. The Department of Energy does know that this is going on and they're excited about it. And so who knows, maybe one day it will be larger, but right now this is a BayREN specific pilot program. And I think that covers all the ones that were before before we start answering them live. Is there a person or way to weigh in with the decision makers on qualifying wall furnaces for mini split rebates? Let me follow up with you on that, Mickey, and anyone else who's interested. I'm not in charge of those work papers, but we do have, actually it's someone from the Frontier Energy team who is for BayREN, so they might know if there's any sort of entity for public comment. All right, is there anything else before we close this out? Thanks for those who hung on during my reading of the Q&A. All right, great. We'll send the slides to you all. We will also upload the recording to YouTube and share that link. BayREN does have a YouTube page in case you all were not aware. It's pretty new, so you might not be, but we have a lot of more and more trainings and different kind of educational things are going up on that YouTube channel. So take a look at obviously this recording, but also just look around in the general BayREN YouTube page and see if there's anything else that catches your eye. All right, with that, I'm gonna stop the recording and everyone have a good Friday and weekend.